Welcome to the Product Perspective. Today, we have a very special guest joining us, Casey Brown, an accomplished product manager with a really diverse background across large enterprise and industries. Casey has more than a decade of experience, is a digital evangelist and a true visionary who brings his love for technology to every aspect of product management and development. In this episode, we'll be delving into some common obstacles that product managers face when it comes to gaining organizational buy-in. We'll cover engaging effectively with technical teams, addressing resistance from peers, and aligning the product roadmap with broader strategic objectives. So grab your headphones and join us for a deep dive into the world of product management. Welcome, Casey.
Thank you. It's awesome to be here. I'm very excited.
What are some of the common obstacles that product managers face when it comes to organizational buy-in, and how can these obstacles be overcome?
Yeah, sure. So I think in general, one of the ones that I've seen more and more as time's going on is especially now, given that the current financial situation, is a lot of it, this mix between, whether people are in waterfall projects or agile projects, or what's becoming more popular is the wagile kind of style, where people have a waterfall funding and financing, but they want agile execution. And I think a lot of that, obviously it has its place within the world, but it can create a lot of challenges in terms of having a fixed budget, fixed scope, and then getting into agile sprints where people do expect things to be able to change on the fly. So I think a lot of that can cause friction, because you might have a release date that is set to a waterfall kind of timeline of saying everything has to be ready to go by this date. And throughout agile you sort of execution, you find some of those things, it mightn't be as realistic, or it mightn't make sense. You're trying to fix the scope or adjust the scope as much as possible to suit needs. But then if somebody asks for something that's a bit more complicated, you start to then have to step back out of the agile world of saying, all right, well, how much is this going to impact our overall timelines? So this is probably one of the big ones.
I've definitely been in organizations where they work that way. I haven't heard a wagile before. I like it. But yeah, it's definitely, we want to be agile and we think agile, but the projects are definitely managed waterfall.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially as you sort of in bigger and bigger industries, and again, but given a lot of the sort of state of the market at the moment, that you can understand sort of the pressures from departments and, financing to say, all right, well, what are we going to get for this, millions of dollars, even smaller startups of, hundreds of thousands, and having that sort of commitment and, what would you call a previous pure agile kind of experience to be able to just say, well, actually, you'll get what you want as we describe along the way, isn't always as comforting for people as you might think. They go, well, hold on, I've just sunk X amount of dollars and I don't know what I'm getting yet. So trying to get that kind of buy-in at all levels can be challenging for sure.
Yeah, and people definitely don't want to change either. Change is difficult in anything we sort of talk about, whether it's changing existing software that we're working on or larger changes to product that we're developing.
Yeah, absolutely. That the sort of total fear of change, where people have said, well, actually, hold on, this is how we've always done things. That's always one of the biggest hurdles you have to overcome, is that people say, I've done this for 20 years. You're coming in as sometimes some new fancy project team is saying, hey, everything's going to change. And sometimes some things it might seem like for the worse for an end user, because you say, well, look, the way you were doing it was previously not secure. I've worked in projects where, and especially with some of the larger profile security breaches, and you look at the sort of process and say, well, actually, look, how this was being handled is probably not the best way, and does increase our risk profile. And so some of those conversations become a bit easier, because you've got the data behind it to say, well, look, that we know this is a risk for these reasons, and especially something like the recent breaches where everyone understands the sensitivity of customer data. And so having that in your back pocket to say, look, these are reasons for it. And then sort of putting that out to say, all right, how does that impact our total costs and budgets and whatnot?
Yep. I guess speaking of budgets, is there, I guess, pressure coming up from the sales side of things? So if you have a sales team that are going in a specific direction because, you know, they're, I guess, at the coalface and they're speaking to prospects and customers, but you're looking to take things in a completely different direction, even though you've got the data to back it up. Is there pressure from that angle as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, based on project to project, sometimes then this is where the sort of waterfall versus agile can, you know, sometimes be, there's pros and cons obviously to each, but sometimes having a waterfall of saying, look, you know, this is the cost that's going in and we know we're going to get these outcomes and it's very locked in and structured, then you can, a lot of conversations are up front, whereas more in some of your freer flowing workflows where you need to have a lot more data behind you along the way to say, look, we want to make this change and, you know, we think it's going to impact in this sort of way. And somebody, you know, again, rightly so, goes, hold on, that's impacting my ability to sell. So what are we getting out of this? And you've got to have those numbers ready to kind of get that buy-in from them to say, yep, we know it's going to impact. And while you might look like you're losing X, Y, and Z, but we think you're going to gain A, B, and C, and sort of have those conversations up front.
Yep. Yep. So I guess also product managers, they have a heavy reliance on the technical teams and developers who, you know, they're not only fixing bugs and building new features, they do lots of other things from the technical side of an organization, and they don't always operate the same, I guess, and the same cadence as the overall product team. So how do you engage effectively with those teams? I'm keen to learn a bit more about this as well, because they, I guess, development teams or the engineering teams, they have different goals and agendas. You know, they're going down one path, but you're trying to drive something completely different.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's definitely some elements there, and what I've learned over the years is that, you know, there's no true way to work. You know, within each company structure, they have their own ways of working, and sometimes, you know, I've worked in projects where you had the entire development team is sitting not only just offshore, but in, you know, 12-hour time differences. So you don't always have the luxury of saying, well, look, if you've got any questions, come ask me. And so in a lot of those cases, it's sort of working out with the team to sort of go and providing that information as much as possible. So, and the idea of you not being there to be able to explain, you know, whether it's a user story and it's got huge amounts of acceptance criteria, because you need to make sure that if you're unavailable or you're not contactable, then somebody can still go through and, you know, you won't be able to write 100% of things all the time, because there's always going to be some little permutation, but making sure that the tools in flow and, you know, whether they're using the same tools. And so as an example, you might have one team uses Jira, and somebody else is using Asana, somebody's using like just a traditional ticketing tool, but then you've got to at least agree a source of truth for a developer to say, look, if you're reading a functional spec in Confluence and then you see a different information in this ticket and you see another bit of information in this ticket, which one should they be using most as their gospel? And so trying to get that aligned, and sometimes it absolutely can increase a lot of overhead, because you've then got somebody who created a ticket in one system and you've then got to get that in other systems, just copying and pasting. If you can build some integrations, it can help there. But getting that clarity of information ready to developers so that they can continue with their work.
Have you found the report, if the reporting line makes a difference there? So if the I guess the person who's doing the actual development, if they're closer to the product manager, if you get a better result versus if they're, say, 3 or 4 lines deep in terms of who they're reporting to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of that can help with, you know, intimacy of the product. So sometimes, you know, giving an ambiguous request that just says, you know, please change the color of this to green, let's say. And then the developer will go, what color green? You know, do you want this green? Is it supposed to be on brand? Is it exactly the same kind of brand? You know, that's a restricted kind of thing. So having those ambiguous requests can really, really cause some pain. But being, where possible, again, getting developers ingrained with the team, and, you know, they can at least understand to say, all right, well, look, you know, we're changing this because it's going to have this impact. And if they understand the kind of why behind something's happening, a lot of times they can help influence their decision, and so that way they could almost represent your ticket on your behalf. So if their line manager is saying, well, hold on, why are we making this change? This seems abnormal. Then the developers already had those previous conversations that aren't necessarily related specifically to that ticket, but they know this is the outcome we're looking for.
Yeah, I can certainly see how having an onshore or an in-house team working on those kind of requests would definitely be an advantage over offshoring that kind of development work, just to remove the ambiguity of that. Have you encountered any resistance from certain members of your organization when it comes to implementing new technology? And if yes, how did you address those concerns?
All the time, in terms of encountering adversity there.
Yeah.
A lot of the projects I've worked on have been fairly large and transformational, and so you are kind of quite often re-platforming, re-changing everything from how they've worked from the ground up. I think in most cases, I was lucky early on in my career. I had a mentor who sort of advised me of pre-engagement, and this applies not just to digital projects, but with any kind of presentations, stakeholder sign-offs or anything. Was the general premise was, if you're going in a room and you have the CTO, the CMO, the CFO all going to be sitting in there, and you need to get them all to sign off, the advice was make sure that they've already said yes before the meeting starts. So you would try, and again, it's not always possible, not always feasible to say, hey, look, I'd also need an extra hour of your time to talk you through things, but they're getting them on that journey early on and being able to sort of say, all right, and people, it's almost like an Inception-like experience where if they feel like they've added to the sort of the story as it was being created, then by the end there's less surprises. The biggest upsets I've seen are where you get into a meeting and everyone's brand new to the idea, and then suddenly one little red flag comes up going, oh, hold on, but what about this? And then somebody else gets another one and another one. So having that pre-engagement to try and make sure that you hopefully can get in there and say, without saying, but going, look, we've all agreed on this already. We all know what's happening and what it's going to do. So is there any concerns? And sometimes what their concerns are up front. So you can build that into sort of the stakeholder discussion to say, look, we know we were going to perform these tasks, and we know that there's some reservations around supply chain, but we plan to mitigate it by doing that. So having that all kind of ready to go on the deck means it's a bit more of a smoother meeting.
I feel like we have had the same mentor.
Yeah.
Just because I as well have been through that, and also one of those early pieces of advice is where if you're running a new project or you're implementing something that's very new and people may have a lot of questions about it, go and speak to each of the stakeholders individually beforehand and bring them across, get them on board early, bring their ideas in, and then when you're presenting that to everyone, it's a known quantity. So there shouldn't be any red flags by that point. It's a great piece of advice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of it seems simple enough, but a lot of times, especially if you're newer in the industry, and sort of getting that confidence to be approaching, some of these people are well outside of your sort of grade in terms of seniority, and trying to get their time to say, oh, look, hey, by the way, I need, trying to frame it up rather than just saying, oh, look, I want to have a chat. And they think, well, what is this? Is this, I'm busy today. You've got to make sure that you go, look, I want to have a chat about, and you hear some of those older kind of terminologies where you've got, I think, was it Harvard Business Review or something? They've got a CODS, which is like your meeting request should say, what is the purpose? What is the outcome? What is the decision makers and structure and whatnot? So having that in there so they can sort of look at it and go, yeah, all right, I already know about this project. Because a lot of times, hopefully it's not too much of a surprise anyway. They know the project you're talking about because you're talking lots of money and lots of people. And so they go, oh yeah, I know what that's about. So yeah, let's definitely have that discussion. And they might say, oh, look, I'm pretty familiar, so we can cut that down to a 15-minute coffee. Or they say, no, I'm pretty concerned about that. Let's lock in a lot of time and bring an army of people to help have this discussion.
Yep. Yeah, I can see that playing out with re-platforming, as you mentioned earlier.
Oh yeah, all the time.
So actually, how many times have you had to re-platform, and do you get sick of it?
Not really sick of it. There's been a lot. Let's see. So within one company, I probably did 6, which was like an e-commerce, a CRM, a loyalty, a field force, another e-commerce, which is for cheaper licensing, some analytics tools and whatnot. And then more recently, there's been another probably 3 or so. So yeah, quite a lot over the years, that a range of whole different things. There's definitely certain flavors that you kind of, what's going to be painful up front.
Yeah.
So it's like things like CRM is probably one of the ones that you stumble into most, because it's something that seems so simple, and especially if you're coming, from some places that are using just Excel and competing with that, the notion of what people expect and what they can do again in their current workflow. So you go, oh, look, you currently have, if you want to add in an extra field into Excel, it's right click, insert column, and they go, oh, that's sales promotion March, yes or no. But that concept playing into a CRM system, which you want to have as much structured data and controls, and then suddenly saying, oh, actually, we want to add an extra field. Oh, that's going to take a few months, and you need digital teams involvement, and you need sign off, and people are fairly hard on that to come to that sort of realization of what the importance is of data clarity and cleanliness, but also trying to be as open as possible so that the business can be more reactive when something changes in the market.
Yeah, I think I've done 1 CRM and 3 other different platforms in my time, which isn't many at all. But I think after doing the first one, I came to realize that the most important things were having the planning is key, outside of the product selection. And then secondly, like, what are all of the gotchas that are going to come up over time? Because once it's implemented and people are using it, you're still implementing things 6 months later. So it just doesn't stop.
Yeah, and it's kind of locked in.
Yeah.
I remember in CRM in particular, I remember a story I often tell people, war stories I find help sell people, because they know you've been through the trenches a bit. And so, one example we had was where we're doing a global Salesforce kind of rollout, and sort of I'd come across and was just sort of listing out, going, oh, name, business name, and got to address, and hit huge amount of roadblocks because there was multiple countries that was being rolled out in, and we couldn't agree on what a postcode would be. Australia being 4 digits, whereas the UK it's 6 digits with a hyphen and can be letters and numbers. New Zealand's got it like, and so then saying, all right, well, we all call it postcode, and we want it to be restricted, that you don't want somebody in Australia entering 5 digits and just having wrong information. But then how do you sort of have that level of customization for each market without it being restricted either?
Yeah, I think at the moment we're grappling with we're still implementing CRM here, and I think we're maybe 7 months into it, and we're just fine tuning things, but not being able to do certain things like country list in a drop down, and it's freeform. So not using it because of that, because people will just put anything in there, and then you've got a data cleanliness issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do you ensure alignment between the product roadmap and the organization's broader strategic goals and objectives?
So I think in part, definitely there's some parts we've already talked about where sort of pre-engaging some of those stakeholders, and they'll always know, because each of them has their own part of the strategy. That you've got some parts of the business that are like, we need to make sales and make as much money as possible. Other people are around data security and making sure that the system is not going to break. So everyone has their kind of own objectives, agendas, whatever you'd like to call it, and sort of making sure from them that what you're working on at least aligns where it can to what those are, and what that roadmap is for the company. And in particular, honesty also helps a lot more than dishonesty in terms of, you can call out to say, look, it isn't gonna, or it is, as we said, it's gonna have some impacts here, or we expect it's gonna drop sales by this amount, but because of these sort of factors, we think it's worthwhile. Because if you omit information from some of those discussions, then people assume you haven't thought of it. So it's easy to have it up there and say, look, we know what it's going to do, and we've thought about all of this quite hard. So don't be too disheartened if you're thinking in your head, oh my God, it's going to have these kind of problems. So I think that's definitely one of them. And we've also touched on a bit about making sure everyone knows what the company's interested in and what we're trying to achieve. And so, some of the projects I've worked on where, fortunately or unfortunately, it was over COVID, and there was, I think the theme of the year was pivot, where everyone was working on something and you just pivot. And so that was, it was almost painful to hear because everyone was going through such a hard change, and it was a tough time for a lot of people personally and professionally. But making sure that, these are the reasons we're doing it. We're not making decisions just because we want to spin up random projects and make everyone's lives painful. We've got a goal, we're trying to achieve it, and we think this is how we can do it.
That's interesting. So I guess, do you work with a 12, 24 or longer term roadmap at the moment?
So generally, even if it's not part of the business structure, I will, where I can, try and work towards at least a quarterly plan.
Yeah.
So you can have, and that just helps again from all levels, I find, because even if it is waterfall agile, if it's anything like that, if you can have the tickets as an example, user stories written out to say this is what we're going to achieve, and these are kind of the sprints, and then that way, if the business does come in and say, hey, look, we need to make these changes, you've already got that kind of mapped out and going, hey, look, we spoke, this plan. A lot of times I'll bring them in on the ceremonies to say, look, this is how we've played back. This is how we're traveling sprint to sprint. So no worries, we can absolutely accommodate your needs there. But putting in 10 tickets means 10 tickets might have to shift. So what does that look like? Is it a ticket that person has authority to just say, yes, we're going to drop it? Or is it something that's going to impact another team? And you have to say, look, we're going to bring some people in because it needs a bit of deliberation.
Yep. So even if you're working towards a 12-month product roadmap, you're looking at it, I guess, more defined in quarterly chunks so that you can still meet, I guess, the demands of someone incoming and wanting to make a change somewhere. You can sort of move things around.
Yeah, the first quarter hopefully is listed out enough that you can say, look, this is kind of, this is where things need to shift on a day-to-day basis. But then the following quarters, you can start bucketing up, and especially once you get that good sprint rhythm, you can fairly accurately predict to some extent to say, oh, look, that based on the last quarter, we know we can get this kind of work done. So this quarter will achieve this. The following quarter would probably be A or B. The following quarter maybe C, D, and E. And after that, I usually will try and just bucket up and say, and we'll tackle the rest in future discussions.
Yeah, and having been through that stage of lots of pivot, have you learned anything from that, and have you kept anything that you learned in the current way you're doing things?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's huge amounts of learnings. It's probably a bit masochistic to say, but I think you learn better from scars than sweetness. So, when everything runs well, it's great, and it's great to feel at the time. But, it's some of the times when things have gone bad or things haven't gone according to plan that you kind of really learn how to shift. One of the things I love to have, but also hate to be in would be, they call them, depending on company, they change, but war rooms, where you end up bringing in, heads of each departments and things to go, look, this is the problem. We need to solve this right now. What are we going to do? And yeah, it's bad to be in them because it means that the business is in a pretty critical situation, but it's great to be in them because you've just got all the minds and all the authority to make the decisions and make the best informed decisions that you can at the time. And so they're sort of almost exciting to be in, and those are good to do. I think on top of that, back to our kind of current theme of over communication. I've worked in some programs where, again, if you've got it mapped out and you think what's going to be happening and anything's going to change, just trying to be upfront around when something's changing from a green to an amber or a red. Again, different businesses handle that differently, so that can be problematic at times. But I find people appreciate it a lot more to say, oh, look, hey, by the way, because of these things, then down the road that might move into an amber, or this is now becoming at risk. And they're aware of it. Everyone's kind of all signing in blood on the same contract saying, well, we agree that's moving to yellow or amber. But then, so that way, when it eventually does move into amber, there's, again, less surprise. Nobody goes, oh, I never knew that was a problem, or nobody told me that was not going to happen. And you can kind of go, look, we've had these chats along the way. So as we all thought, this has now moved into a different status, or this date might have missed, or this milestone.
Yeah, that transparency is really important. My final question for you, Casey, is what advice do you have for other product managers looking to improve their ability to gain organizational buy-in and support for their initiatives? And we've kind of covered a bunch of things off here. So
yeah. So it's an easy one to finish on. So I think, yeah, absolutely, that, as you and I both touched on, that over engagement, over under engagement. There's sort of, I think there's a quote from, I can't remember, it might be a Jeff Bezos type thing, where he said that, most of the stress that you're dealing with is generally because you're putting something off. And, I've been there myself, where you sit there and go, oh, I have to go tell this stakeholder that something's not happening. And you go, this is just good. And the headache you cause yourself in, 2 days of putting it off is much worse than just having the conversation. I think most people will realize that you're not doing things to be painful. You're all trying to achieve the same goal. And as we've touched on already, if you've got that roadmap, you're aligned strategically with the business, sometimes things just happen. And so being able to say, look, we've had these chats along the way. I know that some of them will be hard chats, some of them are easy chats. And I think that makes the final conversations a lot easier. I think outside of that, there's some parts you'll just get with experience. Try again having meetings with some of these big scary people, because they are the directors and C-level and whatnot, and sort of even just getting the occasional coffee with them or the occasional chat, just a little hangout that's not as high stress of a situation, means that when you do get in these meetings, that you realize that everyone's just people, that they all get changed for work the same way we all do. So it's not as scary. The first couple of times when you're getting up in front of effectively like almost a board of people that are all in scary suits and staring at you and asking valid but tough questions, you start to panic a little more and start to keep second guess yourself, go, oh, do they not like me? Is this painful? Do they really hate what I'm saying? And is my career over? But you start to have some chats and go, I know so-and-so, that's just what they like. They like asking tough questions. I can tell that this is what somebody does when they're frustrated, or this is how somebody reacts in a certain way. So getting that relationship built as much as possible, as early as possible, can help save a lot of those longer term conversations.
Yep. That's been really great, Casey. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
No worries.
I learned some things. I hope everyone else did as well. I'm sure they did, but it's been great having you.
No worries. Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. It's been fun.